ago, my wife and I, we go to Sam's Club. I don't know if you've ever been there, but Sam's Club is kind of this big box kind of idea where you go and you get incredibly interesting things in incredibly large quantity. So instead of getting maybe one loaf of bread, you get like 6 in the package. Or instead of getting maybe like one package of potato chips, you get this giant thing that might have like 6,000 potato chips in it or something like that. So, but it's kind of an interesting place to go. A few weeks ago, so we're there. I don't usually go shopping with my wife for this kind of stuff, but we went together and we're going along, and I see my wife pick up this giant thing of lettuce, you know, the kind of lettuce you make salads with, and it's this big container of lettuce. I said, honey, we will never in a million years eat all that lettuce before it goes bad. And my wife, being the more pragmatic of us in our couple, says, yes, but it's actually cheaper to buy this huge thing of lettuce and use what we're going to use than it is to actually go to the grocery store and buy a smaller thing of lettuce. And I thought about the logic of that for a minute, and it really bothered me. As a matter of fact, it bothered me so much that we talked about it all the way home. I said, I can't believe that it's cheaper to buy something in abundance and waste it than it is to go and simply buy what you need. But there's something about our culture, the American culture, that's kind of like that. We are wasteful people. We waste stuff all the time and we don't even think about it. We waste food, we waste all sorts of products, we even waste relationships sometimes. We just kind of graze through life a little bit, taking a little bit as if it's a giant buffet of what we want and leaving everything else to sit there. Well, thanks be to God that He isn't like that. God provides for our needs abundantly, and He isn't about wastefulness. In God there is no wasted food, you might say. 2 points today that come out of this. Now, if you've read the text, you know it's this feeding of the 5,000. You might be expecting me to talk about the miracle, about how the fishes and loaves multiplied and 5,000 people were fed and all that. And I think that's important, but I actually want to focus on a little bit smaller nuance of the story today, and it's this idea of abundance and this idea of wastefulness. So let's take a look at the text for a minute. Verse 5 says, "Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?" If you know the backdrop to this story, you know that Jesus and the disciples, they've been working very hard. They've been dealing with a lot of people, and the disciples were actually expecting a little time off. At the beginning of the passage it says, and the feast of the Passover was coming soon. That's a very big deal. So they're in this kind of in-between time, between a lot of activity and a lot of activity to come. And lo and behold, these people by the thousands show up. And in the middle of all that, Jesus says here, "Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?" Not, how are all these people going to hear me when I preach, or where are we going to put them, or anything like that. What he says is, how are we going to feed them? So know this, God cares about our trivial practical needs, and He provides in abundance. He sees our needs. The Bible says His eye is on the sparrow. He knows our needs before we ask. He knew these people were there. He knew the hour was growing late, and He knew that they needed to eat something, and He brings it up. Second point within this idea of God providing an abundance for what sometimes may be seen as our trivial needs is that Jesus provides for the miracle. He makes a way when there seems to be no way. Now, in this particular case, Philip, if you look at verse 7, Philip immediately goes to the idea in answering Jesus' question of purchasing food for all these people. So his thought process didn't even go to a miracle. It didn't go to somehow God in the person of Jesus supernaturally providing for all these people. He begins to stress out about the money and says, well, if you want to provide food for all these people, it's going to take a year's wage to just give them just a little bit of food. And he focuses in on that. And of course, we see what happens. We see that God takes all that doubt. He takes the frustration. You must imagine that the disciples in this case, 5,000 people have shown up, they're tired. They're probably thinking to themselves, or what I would think if I was one of them, this is not our problem. These people showed up. They knew that the hour is growing late. They knew that they needed to eat. This isn't our deal. Let's just say a quick sermon, send them home, and let them fend for themselves. That's probably what I would have thought, and that must have been in the back of their minds as well. But in the middle of all that, we see God is glorified through the performing of a miracle, the multiplying of this food, and 5,000 people are fed. No one goes hungry with God. The second point for us today, though, is God wastes nothing. I think that one of the most interesting things about this story actually comes as kind of a statement that we kind of tend to gloss over. And it's in verse 12, and it says, when they all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted." Well, that's fascinating to me. They started off with just a little bit of food. Jesus performs a miracle, and the food is multiplied. Everyone is fed. And then in that moment, Jesus is saying to them, let nothing be wasted. Gather what is left over. And indeed they do. The scripture tells us that they gather a total of 12 baskets of food, and we can only imagine, the scripture doesn't actually tell us what they do with that food, but we can only imagine that Jesus saw that what was left over from the grace of God provided in that moment was put to good use. God wastes nothing. There's a tremendous message in that for you and I today, because God indeed wastes nothing. He wastes not a single circumstance. He wastes not a single trial or hardship that we go through. He doesn't waste a single talent that he gives to us. It's all for a purpose. It's not to be wasted. Again, Jesus says, gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted. So sometimes, even in the middle of chaos, even in the middle of great tragedy, even in the middle of discord or whatever, hear those words. Gather the pieces. Let nothing be wasted. We'll talk more about it in part 2.